Ann Springer started in animal training as a horse trainer in the early 1980s, and she's trained her own dogs since childhood. Professionally, she started training pet dogs in the late 90s. She works as a private trainer and also as a class instructor for a facility on the North Shore of Massachusetts. She opened Paws for Praise in 2007. She holds a BA in psychology with honors cum laude from Salem State University and is accredited as a professional canine trainer by the Pet Professional Accreditation Board. Welcome, Ann Springer, to Eight Limbs. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you, Drayton. My pleasure.
Great to have you on. We've talked before about this topic of licensing for pet dog trainers. So please tell me why you're hesitant to legislate licensing for pet dog trainers.
Well, as you may know, Massachusetts, quite some time ago, initiated the first and maybe the only licensure for horseback riding instructors. And at that time, that's what I was doing. So I was basically grandfathered in as a professional. They did give what I would call a cursory test, which was kind of an open book test in the sense that you got the questions and answers in advance to study. And they took my money and gave me a license. Now, I didn't particularly feel at the time that the licensure did anything to affect how people were practicing their craft. And so my fear is that, especially with dog trainers, in a totally unregulated industry, which basically has all manner of methodologies at work, that it's not really going to change much the way dogs are treated. And that, I think, is the impetus behind some of the licensure efforts that are being made, is that people want to have dogs be treated better, and to not have people be taken advantage of by professionals who are not as well qualified as they should be. I'm not sure that's going to be the case. So my inclination is that we might gain more, perhaps, in terms of that type of oversight if we actually strengthened the anti-cruelty statutes and maybe had better enforcement. I'm not really sure that licensure per se is the answer. I think we have to think a little more deeply on how we regulate this profession.
I agree 100%, and there is no guarantee that licensing will ensure safety. We see that in other industries, and I believe the White House made a position statement on this very fact, how licensing isn't necessarily going to ensure quality. Now, you're in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts, correct me if I'm off base here, but I believe they're the only state in the country that actually has provisions in their animal cruelty laws that do protect animals in a training context. Is that true? And if so, has that lowered the abuses in pet dog training at all?
Well, basically, Massachusetts does have a very strong anti-cruelty law, or collection of laws, I should say. And in Massachusetts, animal cruelty is a felony. So in the sense of some of the more extreme things that go on, I would say it probably does. But again, Massachusetts tends to be a higher, I don't know what the word I really want to use is. We do have a higher spay-neuter rate here. We've had positive training for a much longer time than some other areas of the country. More people have switched over. So I don't know how much of it is actually within the statute that's having an effect, or if it's just greater consumer education. From when I started to now, I do get more people who say to me when they call that, I found your site on the internet, and I was impressed by the fact that you are so positive with the dogs and all of that. I'm very transparent on my website. We actually state what we do and basically what we don't do. And so, people get a good idea from just reading exactly who we are. That's not always the case with trainers, as you know. There are people who are, in fact, I read a website the other day where the woman actually used the word e-collar on her website, and in parentheses afterwards said, not a shock collar. And I'm thinking, well, okay, what is the stimulus exactly that collar is emitting? I want to know. But yet, people may not ask that question. So I think it's the transparency and consumer protection issues that are really at the forefront of all of this. I think we have to address those.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about the language and the transparency. Myself, I'm very transparent about what we do and don't do. And one of the problems is people do make stuff up. I mean, if the E doesn't stand for electricity, then please tell me, what does the E stand for in e-collar?
Right,
it's pretty
exactly.
blatant, electronic collar, e-collar. Now, also, veterinarians receive no formal education in animal behavior, and I would imagine you do think this is a good idea. How do you think we should go about having vets obtain more education in regards to animal behavior and specifically dog training? Because dogs at the vet are probably of all the pets people bring in are probably the most risky, and not that all animals don't have stress, but how should we help veterinarians get a better education in regards to animal behavior?
All right. Well, I think I've checked and talked to a lot of veterinarians on this subject because I run a couple of large Facebook groups on various behavior issues. And what the veterinarians have told me is, especially the people who graduated some time ago, they say they didn't get much in the way of behavior training. More recently, though, and I would say this probably is, from the 1990s forward, some vet colleges are giving more attention to behavior. I think a lot of it is largely in the context of how behavior affects clinical diagnoses of medical conditions, but anything along those lines is an improvement over what it was before. And unfortunately, though, I don't think that veterinarians really have the time to be trainers or behaviorists. I do think what they require is the basic knowledge of the science that we use in order to train and modify behavior, to the extent that they would recognize the fundamentals and be able to refer clients to people who have legitimate science education themselves. So I think the Fear-Free initiative is a good step forward in that. I think that, Pet Professionals Guild is certainly concerned with outreach to veterinarians and others in the professions. That's why we're not restricted to trainers. We have members in the organization that are groomers, and of course I'm not speaking for PPG, I'm speaking for myself today. But there are a number of animal professions represented, and with the basic guiding principle that we are going to be using force-free methods to deal with animals. I think that if I had to say what the best course of action would be, because, vets are faced with having to accumulate an enormous amount of information medically. I think if they get that, the preliminary fundamentals and maybe some education in how to choose other behavior professionals to work with and to refer to, that might be very valuable.
Agreed. And, I also want to second that. I don't think vets have the time, nor will they have the means to become dog trainers. But I agree wholeheartedly that at some point in their 4 years of education, they should have a serious look at behavior, how behavior works, the science behind behavior, and also, as you said, how to choose dog trainers so that their patient population is being best served. There's nothing worse than, getting a dog training client who's been, recommended by vets to use certain harmful methods or use trainers who've, done these things. It makes it much more foggy for everybody, because if the person says, well, my vet told me this was good, and then they have, deleterious effects, now we have an even bigger uphill battle. And you've been doing this a long time, and you obviously have probably along the way mentored a number of trainers. Do you have any advice for, newer dog trainers wanting to get into the profession?
Well, I think if I had to say one thing, it would probably be to echo Bob Bailey. He always talks about learning the fundamentals. And I've noticed recently, there's kind of a departure that some people in the profession are making about oh, well, training isn't just all about the quadrants of operant conditioning, and it's not all about learning theory and blah, 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 ad infinitum. But if trainers don't know the history of dog training, and if they don't know those basic fundamentals, they can't really assess what comes afterward. We're always building on our scientific knowledge. I think, though, that his advice on really learning those fundamentals and not jumping quickly into new methodologies because they are being talked about in laboratories versus being tested out in the field. I mean, we don't want to take something that somebody's doing in a lab somewhere and apply it to clients who are paying us unless we're sure that it is fundamentally sound. And I think the way that we do that, perhaps, is we investigate those things thoroughly. We try them, perhaps, on our own dogs, as long as the ethos is correct and we're not harming anybody. And then we go forward. We don't just jump on every new protocol that comes down the pike because somebody wants to write a book and make money on it. So that'd be my first piece of advice. Secondly, I think that we have some, when I came up, we really came up by shadowing other trainers. It was basically all word of mouth. It was you got a dog and you trained it, and if you were good at it, other people asked you to train theirs, that kind of thing. Now we have some really good science-based schools that are being utilized. Not the least of which I know you're familiar, Academy for Dog Trainers is where you went. There's Karen Pryor Academy, Diagnostics, Companion Animal Sciences Institute. There are a few of these places that actually do teach the science in a credible way, and they evaluate their students either online or personally by video. They have video capability and all of that. We're now in the information age, and so people can get an education and can get coached even from long distances away. So even if you don't have somebody like me to shadow around for a year, you can get that education, and it's very, very valuable.
Agreed.
The other thing that I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I agree. And, with today's technology, whether it's filming or the internet, being able to communicate and, watch seminars and so forth, there really is no excuse for dog trainers to not go get what I would call legitimate education, because obviously there are schools that run counter to the, scientific positive approach, and those schools are teaching people how to use shock collars or use aversives. And, just referencing Bob Bailey, one of the things that I love about Bob, among many things, and I personally consider him to be the greatest animal trainer that I ever heard about. Bob said at a seminar I went to that most of the people who he hired for animal behavior enterprises didn't have a degree in behavior, and some of them weren't even college graduates. They just had a deep desire to learn how to train animals, and he showed them how to do it, and they had, very good mechanics and timing. They followed the protocols. And I always relate that experience to your dog clients. You're not going to make dog clients into dog trainers. That's not the point. The point is to show them that it can be done without fear and force. Here are the mechanics, and then you support them through, email support or follow-up sessions. And, that flies in the face of what a lot of people would think, that, we don't need this information, see? But actually, what he backed it up with is you need to learn the language because then you're going to be a better trainer.
Right.
And that's, really where for the professionals who want to go out and train people's dogs need that information so that they know, regardless of the basic, everyday language you might teach in the background, you've got the understanding of quadrants, you've got the understanding of, associative learning and so forth.
Right.
And yeah, there really is no excuse in today's day and age to not seek out legitimate animal training protocols and behavior advice and behavior education. So
I completely agree. And, I'll tell you, one of the most inexpensive ways to do that, all around the country there are community colleges, and almost all of them have basic college courses that people use for their core requirements for degrees. One of those is usually some kind of Psych 101 course. And, you'll hear people on the internet who don't, who are kind of science deniers say, oh, you don't need, that's human psychology, blah, blah, blah. And guess what? All of the terminology is the terminology that we use with dogs. We use the matching law. We use blocking and overshadowing. We talk about operant and classical conditioning. It's all there. And the history of that and the definitions of those things are basically the language that we use. So inexpensively, most people can take a Psych 101 class at a community college, I think for under $400, no matter where you live, probably for less in a lot of locations, and that gives you the basic language. You can buy a book like Birch and Bailey, How Dogs Learn, and basically get the fundamentals. And I like what Jean Donaldson says about training. She says it's a mechanical skill and anyone can learn it. And that's I think fundamentally what you were just saying about the people who went to learn from Bob Bailey and just did what he said and learned that language. And basically I find that, and I don't know about you, are you teaching classes as well as individual right now?
Yeah, I teach 8 puppy classes a week on average,
right.
and like 3 or 4 private sessions a week.
Okay, so I don't know if your experience is similar to mine, but I'll tell you, one of the best trainers that I ever see come through my classes are the 10 to 12-year-old or 13-year-old boys and girls who
Bingo.
have their first puppy,
Bingo.
and they are accustomed to going to school, listening to a teacher, and doing what the teacher asks.
I couldn't agree more. I give this analogy to my clients all the time. The 10, 11, 12-year-old stands up. They do everything that the trainer is asking them to do. The dog is rocking and rolling. Mom and dad stand up. It falls apart because they have baggage. You know, their last dog did this, and I read this, and my friend did this, and how come?
Yeah.
And they have, again, to quote somebody I'm sure you're a big fan of, Dr. Susan Friedman, they have more of a monologue than a dialogue with the dog.
And they label dogs too. They tend to label them. I know Susan is also one of the people that says stop with the labeling.
Yep.
The first thing I tell my students when they say to me, my dog is so stubborn, I don't know what to do, is I look at them and say, not stubborn, uneducated. Once you educate your dog won't appear stubborn anymore.
Well, also that whole ideology, and I'm going to be doing a future show on this, that the dog has a moral imperative. It's scientifically been proven, at least I have one paper that states, a dog's cognition is roughly that of a 3-year-old child. And, that proves, at least in this particular study, and it's a legitimate study, and we can use this and extrapolate it to other examples. I always say that if dogs had a moral imperative, they wouldn't do anything because they can land 25 bites in 4 seconds, and they could shear off a human thumb or a finger with very little effort. So even taking that farther, in the city of St. Louis, there's 35,000 stray dogs. In Los Angeles, there's 2 million. Why have we never read a story where there are packs of dogs running into cities and killing people and stealing their food?
Plotting a coup.
Because it's not going to happen. Dogs, dogs want safety first, food and water, and some kind of fun social activity, whether it's with dogs or humans. So when you break down those barriers that people have, which, sadly have been, repeated and reinforced through, people on television and books and so forth. But when you do strip that away and you just understand, okay, here's the mechanics of training, here's the timing of reinforcements and kind consequences, you inevitably, along with, some common sense management, you inevitably get better results. And, I think that's really the message that we need to, get out to not only dog trainers, but also to our clients, is that, look, you don't need to become a dog trainer, but you do need to become a dog trainer for your dog.
Right.
And that's the motivation I use when people are a little intimidated, like, oh my God, you've had my dog in your hands for 10 minutes and he's perfect. Well, it's like handing the ball to a professional basketball player. They're going to be they're going to be great. They shoot 500 free throws a day. I train dogs, all week long. So and I thank you very much for speaking about this very important topic.
You're very welcome, Drayton. Anytime. Always happy to chat with you.
Thanks. And likewise, we should be very lucky that we have someone as dedicated as you in the field of pet dog training, not only for the work you do in Massachusetts, but all of your online work. And I wish you continued success. And I'm really happy that you're one of the people out here helping not only new dog trainers, but also clients with their dogs. So thank you very much for speaking today on 8 Limbs.
Thank you so much for yourself, Drayton, for all the work that you do, especially your work with pit bulls and also all that videotaping that you do to help others basically be able to see the training in action.
Yeah, I'm just paying it forward. I owe dogs a lot, so I'm never going to stop.
As do we all.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Drayton. Thank you. Take care.